Joy and welcome to my studio. Today we're going to be working on the corn husk loop pumpkin, and these are made out of corn husk, and this is a little bit more detailed project, but it is so rewarding. I love the visual look of it and everything, so it's a lot of fun. You can do them on big pumpkins, you can do them on little pumpkins. That's totally up to you. The little one obviously doesn't take as long. I started with a foam pumpkin from the dollar store or Dollar Tree. You can also get the little smaller pumpkins from there as well, whatever you would like. We're going to be dyeing our corn husk, but I want you to set out 2 to 3 corn husks that we can make our stems and our leaves out of. Probably 1 for the green one and probably 2 at least for the stem, that we can make a different color. And make sure you don't dye those, but then we'll go ahead and dye the rest of them. We're going to start with our corn husk, and one of the biggest questions I get asked is where to find them. You can usually find them in the ethnic section, and if you look, they're like in the Mexican food section, as well as we've also found them in the produce section. I've also found them sometimes at Dollar Tree and at the 99-cent store. The cheaper, the better they work. We don't want a lot of preservatives, especially wax, so the cheaper they are, the better they work. And 1 package goes a long ways. And the first thing I do is I take these, and you can see there is tons in here. They're really compressed tight. And I go and soak these in warm water in the sink and pull them out one by one. That's really important, because if you just put it like this into the dye, they're not going to dye all the way through. So it's really important to pull them out one by one. So while those are soaking, we're going to go ahead and start our dye. And I like to use the RIT liquid dye. It works so much better. You can find it at the craft stores as well as Walmart. In Walmart, it's in with the, kind of think about where it's at, kind of where the bleach and everything like that would be, those kind of items, kind of in that section. It's not with the craft area, so think about it being there. And you want to, first thing you want to do is shake it very well. And on this, it has different things that you can add, and it's got, like, for nylon, add a cup of vinegar or different things, and also one of the ingredients is salt. So I add between a ½ a cup to a cup of salt. And then it says up to 1 gallon of water, and I usually don't add 1 gallon of water depending on how many I'm working on. This will actually do 2 of these really well. So I only put in a ½ one for 1 of these. You don't want to put the whole thing in, because it's going to absorb all to this, and when you go to do the second batch, there's going to be nothing left because it absorbs in. So it's real important that you only use half if you're doing a bag full of the or the corn husk, what we make tamales out of, and then re-add the second half in here. So go ahead, get some water in here, and I only do enough water to cover my corn husk nicely. I don't put too much water in, because the more water you have, the less absorbent it's going to be. So I'd rather have it more potent. And then put it on, start to bring it to a boil, and also add your salt and then your color, stir it up really well, and then go ahead and add your corn husk. And then if you need to add a little bit of more water, you can, and then stir it up. Another thing I used to do was stick it in and then put something on top of it to keep it pushed down so that the dye could get on top, and it doesn't go as well because you're not allowing it to get in between each one of them. So I don't do that anymore. I actually kind of take my tongs and move it around as it's going. Once it comes to a boil, just put it on a nice simmer, and you're going to simmer it for as long as you want the color to take. I I probably did an hour to 2 hours like on black, because you want the black really, really dark. It would probably almost take a couple of hours on that. And don't be afraid to add a little bit more color on in if you're not getting that. Now, by bringing it to a boil and getting it nice and hot, you're getting rid of the wax on the corn husk, if there is any. And sometimes it can be kind of a natural wax too. Don't think about an additive. And it makes it absorb better instead of doing it cold. So that is the reasoning behind it. So just keep it going until it gets the color you want. Remember, it's darker when it's wet, so when it dries it's going to be lighter. And then what I do is, if I'm going to do a second batch, and I usually just go ahead and do all my batches at once, so I have this set aside, and if I use it next time, that's fine. It's just a pain to do it again and again, so just get it all done at one time, and even if you wait for next year, that's okay. And then I take my tongs, I'm at the sink, and then I put it right into the sink and wash it off in cold water, so you're kind of setting it. And then I have what's left in here, and then I add my second half of the bottle, so I don't have to start all over. I can reuse that, but remember, if you don't add this, it's going to be a way lighter color. And if you want that too, that's fine, that's all right. But if you want it to be consistent in color, you need to re-add that again and then keep on going. Now, once these are dry, I made a mistake with these and I've got to go back and do it. While they're still nice and warm, lay them out flat like the black and just lay them down on one top of each other and go put them in the sun or somewhere where they can dry. If you leave them, they can stay wet for several days. And on some of the projects, I don't mind, especially like this guy, if he's a little bit damp, that's okay. And that's why I had kind of left these, as I was kind of doing that and kind of bending him, so him being damp was a good thing, and that's the reason I didn't do that. But they can stay damp for days if they're stacked on top of each other, especially if the weather's not real warm. So if you want them to dry out, then go ahead and set them one on top of each other and get those dried. On the ones like these two here, we want them flat and wide, and so that's why we're going to go ahead and do that. And like I said, on the other pumpkin, if you're working on him, you may want them just a little bit damper so that you can bend those nice and tight. But that is how we dye our corn husk. If you've dyed them and you can keep them a little bit damp, they're better and easier to work with than they're damp, except for the very bottom piece. And you can either blow dry it with a hair dryer or something like that to get this piece all nice and dry. And we're just going to put this on the bottom of the pumpkin because we're not going to cover this area with the loops. So we want to make sure that we've got it covered to match the rest of our pumpkin. Now, if you were doing a pumpkin a different color other than orange, you'd want to paint it the same color as your corn husk, whatever color you're going to be doing those. So I just put that with the hot glue gun in a circle, so anything that's not glued on, we're basically going to trim away at this time. So we have the bottom of it. Now, that's because we want to keep that nice and straight. You can even use these little pieces here. Now, if you've let your corn husk dry, don't worry about that. We're going to wet them and use them as we go. And we're going to be using straight pins. I did try floral pins as well, and you can see the floral pins. I didn't like them. They were too big and bulky, and I didn't really care for them at all. So we're not going to be using the floral pins. Now, if your corn husk were dry, just simply put them in your water. Don't leave them soaking. because then you'll start to bleed and lose some more of your color. But you make them pliable again. And we're just going to be working in probably about 1-inch sections. And the back part can be smaller than the front part. You just have to make sure that we get that anchored onto our pumpkin, the back part as well. And we're going to lay this first one down. I'm going to glue this just a little bit more right here. Make sure those are all tucked in. Just glue those down just a little bit more. Don't want those to show through. And the bottom part, if you have to do that in 2 pieces of corn husk, that's fine. That's okay. All right, so this piece we want to have come, but it's got to not quite touch the ground. So I use 2 straight pins. And I wish it was just a little bit drier. I don't quite even, I would probably wet these in a bunch and then put them out right before you go to put them on. And if they're thin enough that you can do them without wetting, you can, but they have a tendency to split a little bit more. So that's the reason for the wet. And I'm going to put this just right above there. We'll check him and make sure he is good to go. And I am using just regular straight pins. I picked them up from the store. I got 450 in a batch. They're not real long ones, but they're not real short. They're probably 1 inch long, or 1.5 inches long on my straight pins. So that guy is just flush with the ground. And then we're going to go ahead and start the next one. Now you don't want your loops too wide. And we're just going to put it right next to that one. And hopefully we can catch that in 2 straight pins. You don't want any room between these 2. You don't want to see the pumpkin, but that's the reason that you paint the pumpkin the same color as the corn husk. Now the smaller parts, you can even save those for closer to the top. We're going to get to smaller pieces as we go more near the top. They're going to get smaller and closer together. Now the closer you put them together, the more time it's going to take. So that's going to be totally up to you. And another thing I do while they're drying is I kind of push them up so they're not flat to get that loop in there. Now, once you go all the way around, you can come back on the next layer, and I start in the middle. Now, it probably won't stay that way, and you want to make sure that you cover up your pins. That's the most important thing. So, cover up the top of those pins with that loop. Make sure that's covered up. And just keep working your rows that way. And it doesn't have to be, it's going to not line up where it's over the middle of the last one, but I like to at least start that way and try to do some of it that way. And you'll keep working all the way around. So then your next row, and like I said, just save your little tails for the next row unless they're too small. This guy right here may be too small, but then your next row you're going to come up and do that. And we're going to keep those all pretty well about the same size until we start to shrink right about there. So go ahead and fill those up. Now while you're working on those, let's go ahead and get our leaves and stems drying. And those are also going to be made out of the corn husk. And I picked a leaf green. This is light foliage green. I wanted kind of a autumn color. I didn't want it real bright. I wanted it more Thanksgiving color. So any green that you think that goes with the orange is fine. There's no right or wrong on this. And I'm going to wet my paint down a little bit and just brush it on to my corn husk to dye this corn husk. Because we're not doing that much of it, if you had some corn husks that you dyed green or brown, you could use that. You don't have to paint it. But if you're just doing a little bit, if it doesn't make sense to paint it, or excuse me, to dye it just for a small amount. So we're going to just paint it and then put it on your dry board. If you don't know what a dry board is, come over and check those out our website at miriamjoy.com. Make sure you do both the front and the back, and I really probably should have my apron on here. I like to get messy. Now, you can see on the corn husk, one side absorbs more than the other side does. You'll have a lighter and a darker side. So that is up to you. If you want to put a little bit more paint on the one side or not. Now let's go ahead and get our brown done. And I'm going to use an autumn brown, a medium brown. You can do dark, you can do light, whatever you want. Or you can use the paper twist, but I thought since we're going with the corn husk, let's just stick with the corn husk. And I'm going to do 2 of these. And one thing of corn husk is more than enough to get you all the way done on your pumpkin. This one does take a lot more than our other little ones that we did with corn husk. And you can check that video out as well. That's a lot of fun. They're a lot less time consuming, but I've had so many people see these and already want to know how to do them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and finish this up, do 2 of these guys, and I'm going to start my pumpkin and do him up until we start to go smaller, and we'll work on it from there. Okay, I've done all of these and they've started to dry, and I want to kind of show you this. When I put these together, they were right next to each other. So when they dry, they kind of shrink up a little bit. So it's real important to have those touching as close as you can because they do kind of shrink up. Now, I saved all my tails as I was working because we've come to the hump and we're going to start making these smaller and smaller pieces. So, you can use these smaller strips now, and I'm going to try and make them the same size. They're still going to be a little bit smaller in the back end, and again, I'm going to try and have these touching as much as possible. I did less rows in this one than I did my first original pumpkin, and I noticed I think I did a better job of covering my pins up as well. So we just kind of want to do a row where we cover up our pins. And remember, it is going to shrink up a little bit. Now, like I said on these guys, we want to kind of touch them, make sure that this bottom part is touching. So you may have to cross over onto that top part a little bit next to the other one, and that is fine. And the farther up I went, the closer it got together and the smaller my pieces got together. Now if you can keep them bigger, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just how you think it should be done. Just try and keep your pins covered up as much as possible. And another thing I want to discuss is why we're pinning and not gluing. When you're gluing, you can get really messy, and we've got so many of these. I think it is much neater and cleaner with the pins. You're not going to burn yourself, and I think in the long run it's going to stay on better. So that is the reason that I pin them and not glue them. Now even some of these might be nice on the very center part, and we're going to go all the way into the middle before we actually put our stem on. So don't worry about leaving room for that stem. Go ahead and get those up there as much as possible before we stop to put on our stem. And just continue, work it around, all the way around, and using up all the tails to the best of our ability. And I am going to show you, I'm going to have our camera guy zoom in just a second here on how we are kind of crossing over at the tops of these up here on the top, so these are as close together as we can get those. And I'm going to go ahead and finish it up, and then we'll show you how to put it all together. I wanted to show you the center. We're going to get a close-up for you to see. This stem isn't in the middle, so I've got a little bit more room on this one, but I've almost pinned up all the way to the stem, but I'm still going to add 1 or 2 more layers right in that area just to fill it up all the way. But I kind of wanted to give you a reference point so you know what yours look like, and then we're going to continue those 2 around. I went ahead and added about another 1.5 rows actually all the way around there. Got those pins up as tight as I could, and then that part that was a little bit wider, put an extra row in. I also want to show you there's a little kind of trick you can do. If you think that your part that you put in is too wide, just take your scissors and cut it in half, and then you'll have 2 smaller pieces. Don't cut that all the way down, but when that dries up, then you'll have, it'll kind of separate, and you'll have smaller pieces there. So you can do that if you have some that you feel should be smaller instead of wider in that area. And that's kind of a little cheat part. Okay, so let's go ahead and get our leaves and our stems ready to go. And this should probably be dry, so let's dry that a little bit. And that was the main reason, I didn't think about it when we were talking about it earlier, why we don't glue gun it, because our corn husk is wet. So that's really important. We want to get this nice and dry. And I suggest drying this naturally. I don't suggest you hurrying it on like I'm kind of doing here, because we've got the foam pumpkin here, and you don't want to melt it like I'm kind of doing the stem a little bit here. Looks like a dinosaur skin. That's pretty funny. So we're going to make our leaves, and I'm going to do 3 leaves, and that's going to help close this area off as well too. So, however, I want to cut them kind of up and down, and you don't want them too big. be too big. We'll take a look here and see. That might be okay. It's a bigger size pumpkin, and probably what I'll do on the bottom one is kind of cut that at an angle. And our next one. Cut that at an angle there already, and just cut that. And you could cut these before you colored them, so you didn't have to color the whole thing if you didn't want to. That's no right or wrong on that. I'm going to do a couple extra leaves just in case. It's better to have too many than not enough. And that's kind of a skinny one. That'll be our way back up one. And a fatter one here. And then I'm going to go ahead and add some color to the bottom of these really quick. And kind of decide which side you want up. I'm going to put the more coarse side up. It's got the more color on it. And I'm going to use a darker color, a darker green, a Christmas green, a forest green. I'm using Old Ivy. And I'm just going to take this color and walk some other color up into that leaf at the bottom, just so it has that dimension look to it. And we'll see if we can kind of set that here. And I need a little bit more water into my brush. This will actually work better if you do this when your leaves are wet and you just painted them. You'll get more of that look. So do that while they're wet. And I'm just going to darken those up. I'm not worried about them being perfect. Kind of make them two-tone. You can do both sides if you want to, or you can do just the top side. That's up to you. I really didn't want to wet those down too much because I want to basically glue those on. So we're going to put our stem on. And you kind of decide, this guy's pretty long, so do we want to get rid of the top or do we want to get rid of the bottom? And I'm going to get rid of the bottom. And you could make these short stems. There's no reason they have to be long. That's totally up to you. So I'm just going to hot glue this puppy on. Wrap that around there. I want to get that down as far as I can around that, so it's on there nice and tight, but I don't want that stem to show. So that's kind of what I'm working on here. And I'm going to glue that up the seam there. It's a little bit different stem. If you want to put a paper one on like we've been doing, do one of those. There's no right or wrong on this. And then what I'm going to kind of do is kind of bend them out, whatever you want to do. Make him look more natural, not quite so at one level here. Just kind of roughen him up there. And you could wet him a little bit more and bring him down, kind of bring him down to the sides, make him more pliable. Do whatever you want to do with that. And like I said, if you'd rather put a paper twist stem on it, then put a paper twist stem on it. I did some with the paper twist and some with the corn husk on some other pumpkins, and you could not tell which was which just by looking at them. So just do whatever you kind of like on those and whatever you think looks good. Now, I'm going to make the curly cues on these. What I do is I take a real thin piece of my brown, and it tears easier and straighter when it's wet. So after I get a small enough piece, then I'll wet it and tear an even smaller piece. And then I will take a clothespin and wrap it around my dowel, and then clothespin that on both ends and let that dry, and that will make your curly cues. So then we're going to go ahead and put our leaves on and decide what area you may need covered up, what you don't like as well, and start with those areas first. So I'm going to put hot glue on the back of that, and again, you can make these pliable, wet them down a little bit, make them go the direction you want them to go. Give them some life and not so straight up and down. I don't like straight up and down. I like movement. And make this guy even wider on the bottom. He'll even cover up more. And another thing that you could put in here, if you were still having problems covering up some of this stuff, put some Spanish moss, just a little bit, just a tiny bit, right on top. And I may even do that just to kind of show you how that would look, just for the fun of it. I think I've still got my Spanish moss sitting over here. Just to have something different in it. Now remember, some of this isn't quite all the way dry, so it's still going to shrink up a little bit even more. And I'm going to do just a sliver, not hardly any at all, but it's going to help cover up those pins, and then we'll have something to stick our vines into. Just going to do some hot glue all the way along the bottom here. We have had the most requests. People have seen this pumpkin and have been asking me to do it. It's a little bit of work, but it's going to be one that you're going to love. So sit down and watch TV or whatever. It'll go by fast. So these curly cues I had kind of sitting here. So we're going to put them on. It could be a little bit drier. But just glue those on, and then you get that really fun vine feel out of that. So whew, we finished him. And sometimes I put off a project even though it's one of my favorite ones, because I know there's a little bit more work in it than some of the others, so that is the reason. So we finished our corn husk loop pumpkin, and what's really going to be great about this is going to be one you treasure for years to come. I probably will take this outside and put some spray varnish on it to help it just set up. I'll probably use flat so it's not real shiny, but it'll help for keep it nicer, the color nicer, and it may also help that the critters don't get into it for years to come. So come on over to my Facebook page at Miriam Joy's Waxy Crafty Corner. We're always putting up the new fun projects for you to view first, and then you can check out, they'll give you a video link if we've got it, and help you make more fun projects. God bless.